"I'm sorry, there was no baby girl brought here recently," she replied, her tone cool and dismissive. Sonia and Ekeng exchanged confused glances, their hopes fluttering. But we spoke to the hospital staff. They assured us that the baby girl was transferred here. The doctor himself suggested we come to Hope's shelter, Sonia explained, her voice laced with desperation. Madame D was once the picture of grace and success. Married to Chief Adekunle, a well-respected businessman, she lived in the grand home, hosted elegant dinners, and dressed in the finest clothes. From the outside, her life looked perfect. She had everything a woman could ask for: luxury, status, and a husband who initially seemed to adore her, but her heart carried a sorrow that wealth couldn't soothe. The issue began after a few years of marriage, when Madame D realized she couldn't conceive. At first, her husband was supportive, encouraging her to seek different treatments, visit doctors, and even explore traditional healing methods. Madame D did everything she could, enduring countless procedures and rituals, driven by a deep longing to hear the laughter of her own child. But after many years of trying, the hope began to fade, and with it, her husband's patience. Chief Adekule was a man who valued family and lineage. As time passed, he became frustrated, and his once warm attitude toward Madame D turned cold and distant. He stopped attending doctor's appointments with her, stopped asking about her well-being, and the warmth between them slowly faded. Friends and family members subtly hinted at his frustration, suggesting he might seek a second wife. Eventually, he made the painful decision to divorce her, and not long after, he remarried. Within a year, his new wife gave birth to a healthy baby boy, further deepening Madame D's sorrow. Madame D was left devastated. The grand house she had once shared with Chief Adenkule felt empty and echoing. Memories of her happier times haunted her, and the silence of the house was a daily reminder of her loss. She struggled to find purpose and sank into a period of loneliness, wondering what her life could have been if she had just been able to give Chief Adekunle a child. In her darkest moments, she sought solace by volunteering at a nearby children's home, surrounded by children's laughter and innocent smiles. She found a sense of peace that helped fill the voice in her heart. Her love for children blossomed even more, and she felt a calling to do something meaningful with her life. Madame D soon had the idea that gave her a new purpose, a dream to create a place for children who had no one to care for them. Using the remaining wealth she had from her marriage settlement, Madame D founded Hope Shelter, an orphanage home where she could care for orphaned and abandoned children. The community was initially taken aback by her decision, as many had not expected the once elegant Madame D to take on such a venture. But as time passed, people began to admire her dedication. Hope's shelter grew quickly, gaining attention from donors and patrons who were touched by Madame D's story and her apparent devotion to caring for children. Her kindness and motherly warmth endeared her to many, and donations began to pour in. Community members often remarked on her transformation, praising her strength and resilience. The orphanage soon became one of the most well-funded in the area, equipped with comfortable rooms, a playground, and a small school to educate the children. It seemed to be a haven for those in need, a place where children could find shelter, love, and a chance for a better life. But as the years went by, whispers started to circulate. Some in the community noticed unusual things. Children who had stayed at the orphanage would suddenly disappear, and when asked, Madame D would offer vague explanations, saying they had been abducted by families overseas. Others felt uneasy about the way she avoided questions about certain donations or why she kept such tight control over the orphanage's operations. Despite the quiet reservation of a few, her reputation remained largely untarnished, as most believe she was simply a woman who had found her calling in caring for vulnerable children. Madame D's orphanage continued to grow, both in reputation and wealth. The community's faith in her seemed unshakable, and her name became synonymous with compassion and generosity. But beneath the polished exterior, an unsettling truth lay hidden, waiting for the day it would come to light. Sonia and Ekeng had been eagerly awaiting the arrival of their second child, filling their home with laughter and love as they prepared. Their firstborn, a lively boy named Denzel, was their pride and joy. Sonia loved watching Denzel run around the house, his laughter filling every corner. She imagined him as an older brother, guiding and playing with his new sibling. Ekeng, a hardworking and doting husband, made sure Sonia had everything she needed during her pregnancy, showering her with love and support. One crisp morning, Sonia felt the first pangs of labor. Ekeng, she whispered, gently nudging him awake. I think it's time. Ekeng's eyes widened, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He quickly helped her gather everything they needed, and soon they were on their way to the hospital. Their hearts were full of hope, each step bringing them closer to the moment they had dreamt of. In the car, Ekeng held Sonia's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. You are doing great, he said, smiling, though his own heart raced with anticipation. When they arrived at the hospital, Sonia was taken to the maternity ward. As Ekeng waited in the hallway, he noticed Sonia striking up a conversation with another pregnant woman in the room. The woman's name was Angela. She too was preparing to give birth. Angela had a calm, serene demeanor, a gentle smile that put Sonia at ease. Despite being strangers, they connected over their shared experiences, sharing stories of motherhood and the dreams they had for their soon-to-be-born children. Do you have any family here with you? Sonia asked, noticing Angela was alone. Angela's smile faltered slightly. No, it's just me. My family, they are all gone, but I've made it this far and I know I'll be okay. This baby will be my new family, she said softly, a mix of determination and tenderness in her voice. Sonia felt a pang of sympathy, but admired Angela's resilience. The hours passed, and as the pains of labor intensified, Sonia's thoughts were filled with visions of holding a newborn, and of Denzel meeting his sibling, and of her little family expanding. Ekeng paced the hallway, occasionally glancing in, offering Sonia encouraging smiles, his love for her radiating in his eyes. But the day took an unexpected heartbreaking turn. During delivery, complications arose. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Sonia and Ekeng's baby didn't survive. The moment they shared the news with Sonia, her heart shattered. Ekeng, who had been waiting with such hope, felt a crushing weight fall over him. He wrapped his arms around Sonia as she wept, her body racked with sorrow. In another room, Angela was also giving birth. The hospital staff moved quickly, but the delivery was quite complex, and Angela's condition worsened. Tragically, Angela didn't survive, but her baby, a beautiful, healthy girl, survived. The nurses were left holding the tiny newborn, who was now alone, with no family or relatives to care for her. Back in the room, Sonia clung to Ekeng, numb from grief. The dreams they had built, the plans they had made, lay in ruins. In that moment, she could only feel the emptiness that her baby's absence left behind. After returning home, Sonia moved through each day in a fog of grief. The once lively and joyful atmosphere in their home had turned quiet. She would watch Denzel playing, her heart aching at the thought of what could have been. Ekeng tried his best to comfort her, staying close, holding her hand when words didn't seem to help. Still, the emptiness of their loss weighed heavily on them. One afternoon, as Sonia sat on the edge of her bed, she reached for the bag she had packed for the hospital. She hadn't had the strength to look through it since returning home. Gently, she unpacked each item, her hands shaking as she folded the tiny baby clothes they had hoped to dress their newborn in. Just as she placed the last item back in the bag, a small folded piece of paper slipped out, falling softly onto her lap. Frowning, Sophia picked it up, unfolded it. She stared in disbelief as the short message written in neat, delicate handwriting. If anything happens to me, please take care of my child. Her father denied the pregnancy and I have no one who can care for her. Thank you, Angela. Sonia's heart pounded as she read the note again, her mind flashing back to the brief but warm conversation she had shared with Angela at the hospital. She remembered the quiet strength in Angela's eyes and the way she had spoken about the baby being her only family. Now Angela was gone, and this tiny piece of paper was all that remained of her plea. Shaking, Sonia went to find Ekeng, her hands trembling as she handed him the note. "Look at this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotions. Ekeng took the note, reading it carefully, his expression turning from confusion to understanding. Sonia, this child. Angela left her in her care, almost like she knew what was going to happen. Ekeng said slowly, realizing the weight of what they were holding. He glanced at his wife, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "What should we do, Ekeng?" Sonia asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Angela's baby is alone in this world. She asked us to take care of her." Ekeng put his arms around Sonia's shoulders, drawing her close. "I think we should go to the hospital and find out what happened to the baby. Maybe she needs us as much as we need her." The following morning, they returned to the hospital, holding Angela's note tightly as they walked through the doors. Memories of their recent loss surfaced, but they pushed through, focusing on the mission before them. They approached the doctor who had handled Sonia's care, explaining the note and their connection to Angela. The doctor nodded solemnly, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Yes, I remember Angela," he said, glancing at the note Sonia held. Her baby girl had survived, and she was healthy. Since Angela had no family listed, the child was transferred to a nearby orphanage just 2 days ago. Sonia felt a pang in her heart. The thought of Angela's baby in an orphanage, alone and without family, tore at her. She looked at Ekeng, who squeezed her hand, silently encouraging her. Turning back to the doctor, Sonia asked, "Could we visit the orphanage? We'd like to see her and maybe bring her home." The doctor's face softened and he nodded. "Take this note with you as a proof of Angela's wishes. I will also call the orphanage and inform them of your visit. If you truly wish to care for the child, they will guide you through all the formalities." Sonia's heart lifted slightly, a glimmer of hope breaking through her grief. She and Ekeng left the hospital with renewed purpose, heading towards the orphanage where Angela's child was taken to. Sonia and Ekeng drove to Hope Shelters with nervous anticipation, holding on to the hope that Angela's baby girl would soon be in their arms. As they approached the modest building, a feeling of uncertainty settled over them, but they brushed it off, focusing on the possibility of bringing the baby home. Inside the shelter, they were greeted by Madame D. She motioned for them to sit, folding her hands on the decks as she listened to their story. "We were at the hospital a few days ago when Sonia gave birth," Ekeng began, his voice steady. "We met a woman there, Angela, who also gave birth around the same time. She unfortunately didn't survive, but her baby girl did. We came across this note Angela left, asking us to care for her child if anything happened to her." He passed the note to Madame D, who scanned it carefully, her face unreadable. For a moment, Sonia thought she saw a flicker of something in Madame D's expression, a shadow of recognition. But then the woman's face hardened, and she shook her head. "I'm sorry, there was no baby girl brought here recently," she replied, her tone cool and dismissive. Sonia and Ekeng exchanged confused glances, their hopes fluttering. "But we spoke to the hospital staff. They assured us that the baby girl was transferred here. The doctor himself suggested we come to Hope's shelter, Sonia explained, her voice laced with desperation. Madam D remained unmoved, her gaze steely. I am sorry, but there hasn't been no such transfer. We haven't received a newborn baby girl in about 5 weeks. But Angela's baby was brought here, Ekeng insisted, leaning forward. The hospital has records of the transfer. This note, he gestured to the piece of paper, is a proof that Angela entrusted her with the child. Madam D glanced at the note again, then pushed it back towards them. Hospital records can be mistaken, and as I said, no baby girl has been brought in here recently. I suggest you return to the hospital and confirm your informations. Her words felt like a slap, leaving Sonia and Ekeng in stunned silence. Something didn't feel right. Madam D's cold expression and refusal to cooperate left them with a sense of unease. Sonia's heart ached, her mind racing. What could have happened to the baby if she wasn't here? The idea that Angela's child could be lost or worse was unbearable. She looked at Ekeng, who clenched his jaw, sensing her distress. He reached over, squeezing her hand in reassurance. After a tense moment, Ekeng spoke up, his tone resolute. We will verify with the hospital, but we'll definitely be back. Madam D merely nodded, her face as impassive as stone. She rose from her seat, signaling that the meeting was over. As they left Hope's shelter, Sonia felt a knot of frustration and worry forming in her chest. Ekeng, something is wrong. I know that baby was brought here. Why would she deny it? Ekeng sighed. I don't know, Sonia, but we will get to the bottom of this. Let's return to the hospital and double check with the doctor. Maybe, just maybe there was a mix-up or something. But deep down, both of them sensed there was more to this than a simple mistake. The unsettling experience at Hope Shelter left Sonia and Ekeng determined to uncover the truth. They returned to the hospital, hearts pounding, and demanded to speak with Dr. Adeyemi, the physician who had attended both Sonia's and Angela's deliveries. Dr. Adeyemi welcomed them to his office, his face clouding with concern as they recounted the events at the orphanage. This is deeply troubling, Dr. Adeyemi murmured. Angela's baby was indeed transferred to Hope's shelter. I personally signed off the paperwork. Here, let me show you. He pulled out the files and handed it to Ekeng, who read the official document confirming that the baby had been sent to the orphanage home and had also been received by the orphanage home, just as the doctor had said. Sonia's heart raced as she scanned the details, feeling a flicker of hope. With evidence in hand, she looked at Ekeng, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. Ekeng, we can't let this go. We have to do something, Sonia said firmly. Ekeng nodded. Doctor, we need to get the authorities involved. This doesn't feel right, and we owe it to Angela's baby to find her. Dr. Adeyemi agreed and encouraged them to report the matter to the police. Armed with the hospital's documentation, Sonia and Ekeng headed to the nearest police station. There, they met with Detective Olumide, a serious-looking officer with years of experience. They explained the situation, showing him the hospital's paperwork and recounting Madam D's denial. Detective Olumide listened intently, his brows furrowing as he took the notes. This isn't the first report we've had involving shady activities at Hope Shelter, he said, shaking his head. If what you're telling me is true, we may be looking at something far more sinister than a simple miscommunication. The following morning, the police launched a formal investigation into Hope's shelter. Detective Olumide and his team arrived at the orphanage, flashing their badges as they entered the building. Madam D, looking startled but composed, greeted them at the entrance. We are here to ask some questions regarding the recent transfer of an infant from the hospital, Detective Olumide stated firmly. We will need access to your records, your files, and your facilities. Madam D's face paled slightly, but she maintained her composure, nodding stiffly. Of course, officer, please follow me to the office. The officer spent hours combing through records, questioning Madam D and her staff. Madam D answered each question with a practiced calm, sticking to her story that no newborn girl had been brought in recently. But Detective Olumide, skilled at reading people, sensed there was more beneath her calm facade. After a long day, Detective Olumide requested a private word with Madam D. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Madam D, I advise you to tell us the truth now. We have evidence from the hospital, and any further dishonesty will only make matters worse for you. Madam D's composure finally cracked. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the room. Silence hung heavy as the pressure mounted. Finally, in a low voice, she admitted, Fine, I'll tell you everything. Yes, Angela's baby was brought here, but she's no longer with us. The officer's eyes widened as she continued, her voice trembling. I sold her to a wealthy couple who had been desperate for a child. They offered a large sum of money, and I thought it would help the shelter financially. We needed this money to keep running the home. Sonia, who had been anxiously waiting outside, overheard Madame D's confession through the partially opened door. Her hand flew to her mouth in shock, tears welling up in her eyes. She turned to Ekeng, her voice breaking. They sold Angela's baby like she was some kind of commodity. Ekeng, equally horrified, wrapped his arm around her. We will get back Sonia, we will fight for her. Detective Olumide, now visibly angry, ordered Madame D to give the contact information of the couple who had taken the child. Trembling, she scribbled down an address and handed it to him, her face drained of color. Madam D, you are under arrest for illegal adoption practices and child trafficking, Detective Olumide announced as two officers moved to cuff her. The gravity of her actions weighed heavily on her, and she hung her head as they led her away. Sonia and Ekeng watched as Madame D was escorted out, feeling a mix of relief and lingering horror. Now, their thoughts turned to Angela's baby. Somewhere out there, she was living with strangers, unaware of her true origins. Sonia's heart ached, but with renewed determination, she clutched Ekeng's hand. Let's bring her home, Ekeng, she whispered, her voice filled with resolve. Ekeng nodded. We won't rest until she is with us, but I really hope she's fine. They knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but Sonia and Ekeng were ready to fight for the child they now felt bound to by love and responsibility. The news of Madame D's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Hope's shelter had long been considered a place of compassion and safety, a sanctuary for children in need. But as more information emerged, the true horrors hidden within the orphanage walls began to surface. Madame D had orchestrated a child trafficking ring, exploiting vulnerable children and desperate families alike. Detective Olumide uncovered a carefully woven network, each thread linking to another dark secret. He and his team worked tirelessly, sifting through piles of documents, records, and financial transactions. They discovered that Madame D, along with a handful of trusted staff members, had been running the operation for years, selling out children to wealthy clients under the guise of legal adoption. Sonia and Ekeng followed every detail with growing dread. The revelation left them horrified, not only for Angela's baby, but for all the innocent lives that had been torn apart by Madame D's greed. They sat side by side in Detective Olumide's office, listening as he explained the layers of deception. Madame D manipulated the records, Detective Olumide said. Many of these so-called adoptions were actually illegal sales. She targeted children who had no family to speak for them, babies like Angela's daughter. Sonia clenched her fist, her face pale. I can't believe such evil exists. Those children, they were taken from families who wanted to even love them. Eken grabbed his arm around her, trying to comfort her, though he too was reeling from the betrayal. Angela's daughter deserves better than this. We'll find her, Sonia. We really have to. Days turned into weeks as the investigation expanded. With Madame D behind bars, more of our staff members began confessing, revealing additional clients and details of other operations. Each new piece of information led the authorities closer to the wealthy couple who had purchased Angela's child. One evening, Detective Olumide contacted Sonia and Ekeng, summoning them to the station. When they arrived, he greeted them with a solemn expression. "We have tracked down the couple who currently have Angela's daughter," he informed them. "Their names are Mr. and Mrs. Ajayi, a wealthy couple living in the gated estate outside of the city." Sonia's heart raced. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Yet fear gripped her. What if the couple refused to return the child? What if they had grown attached? Or what if they had even given her out? "Are they aware of how they acquired her?" Ekeng asked, his voice tight with anger. Detective Olumide nodded. It appears they were fully aware. They had been trying to adopt for years, but wanted to avoid the lengthy legal process. Madam D took advantage of their desperation and convinced them that this was a faster, though costly route to parenthood. Sonia felt a surge of disgust and determination. "We have to confront them. They must understand that this child is not theirs, and she has a rightful family waiting for her." Detective Olumide agreed and arranged for Sonia and Ekeng and a small police escort to visit the Ajayi's residence. As they approached the estate, Sonia's hands shook and she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. When they arrived, the gate was opened reluctantly by the Ajayi security guard. They were led to the grand entrance of the house, where Mr. and Mrs. Ajayi were waiting, visibly anxious and defensive. Mrs. Ajayi held the baby girl in her arms, cradling her protectively as she cast wary glances at the strangers on her doorstep. Detective Olumide reintroduced himself and explained the situation, detailing how the child had been trafficked under false pretenses. "Mr. and Mrs. Ajayi, the girl you hold was taken from her rightful family, this couple," he said, gesturing to Sonia and Ekeng. "They are here on behalf of the baby's biological mother, Angela, who passed away during childbirth. Angela had no family and entrusted her child to them through a letter she had left behind." Mrs. Ajayi's face contracted with emotions. "We paid a fortune for her," she blurted out, her voice trembling. "She has been ours since the day she was brought to us. We love her." Sonia stepped forward, her eyes filled with compassion but a firm resolve. "I understand how much you must love her. She's a beautiful child, but she is not truly yours. Her mother entrusted her to us, and she deserves to know her real family and her true story." Mr. Ajayi looked down, avoiding contact. "We didn't know her mother had passed away," he admitted quietly. "We thought we were giving an unwanted child a home." "There was no transparency," Detective Olumide said, his tone calm but authoritative. "This was a transaction based on lies. And unfortunately, Madam D's deception doesn't change the reality of who this child truly belongs to." Tears streamed down Sonia's face as she looked at the baby, her heart aching with both hope and sadness. "Please," she whispered, "give her the chance to know the love her mother wished for her." A tense silence followed. Finally, Mrs. Ajayi's grip on the baby loosened. Her shoulders sagged in defeat, and with trembling hands, she handed the baby girl to Sonia. The little girl blinked up at Sonia with wild, innocent eyes, unaware of the emotions swelling around her. Sonia took her into her arms, her heart swelling with a fierce protectiveness. "You're safe now. You're home with me," she whispered. Mr. Ajayi nodded. "We are wrong to bypass the proper channels. I hope she finds all the love and happiness she truly deserves." Detective Olumide thanked the Ajayis, and they left the estate with Angela's baby, whom Sonia and Ekeng now saw as their own. As they drove back home, Sonia held the baby close, filled with a sense of peace and fulfillment she hadn't felt since she first lost her own child. Ekeng placed a hand on Sonia's shoulder, offering her a warm smile. "We did it, Sonia. We finally brought her home." Sonia looked down at the girl in her arms and whispered, "Welcome to your family, precious one. You are safe now and you will never be alone again." With Angela's baby safe in their care, Sonia and Ekeng's hearts swelled with relief and gratitude as they cradled the baby girl in their arms. They had been through a whirlwind of emotions: grief, anger, frustration, and now, finally, a feeling of peace. They named her Eliora, meaning God is my light, a name they felt captured the blessings she was, a light after the darkness that they had endured. Sonia looked down at Eliora, her heart filled with the love that ran so deep. It felt like it could break her. She whispered softly, "I promise you, little one, I will protect you with all my heart, just as Angela would have wanted. You are home now." Eken wrapped his hand around both Sonia, Eliora, and their son Denzel, feeling a sense of completeness. "We will make sure she's surrounded by love and joy," he said, his voice thick with emotions. They felt a deep responsibility not just to raise Eliora, but to honor Angela's final wish, a promise they were now determined to fulfill. As they bonded with Eliora, Sonia found herself revisiting memories of her own lost child. There were moments of bittersweet sorrow, but she drew strength from knowing that Eliora had brought new purpose and hope into their lives. She would watch over Eliora as if she were her own, giving her all the love she had stored in her heart. While Sonia and Ekeng settled into their lives, the investigation into Hope's shelter gained momentum. The revelation of the orphanage hidden child trafficking operation spread like wildfire, shocking the community and drawing national attention. Madame D, once seen as a respected figure, was now the face of betrayal and cruelty, exposed for the exploitation and pain she had inflicted on innocent families. The law enforcement intensified their efforts, and Madame D and her accomplices were arrested on charges of child trafficking, forgery, and illegal adoptions. The courtroom was filled with parents and family who had once trusted Hope Shelter, and they listened as the charges were read, their hearts heavy with a mixture of sorrow and anger. As Madame D stood before the judge, her face showed none of the pride she once held. She appeared broken, her eyes filled with defeat as her empire of deception crumbled around her. Her accomplices, workers who had knowingly assisted in her illegal activities, sat beside her, their expressions equally bleak. "You exploited innocent lives," the judge declared sternly. "You betrayed the trust of parents and family members, including relatives, selling their children as if they were possessions. Such actions will not go unpunished." Madame D's sentence was long and severe, and her accomplices faced similar consequences. The court's proceedings closed with a sense of justice, though the wounds left by her actions would take much longer to heal. After the trial, Hope Shelter was shut down, and the government swiftly implemented new regulations to oversee orphanages across the region. Rigorous inspections and strict protocols were enforced to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. A team of social workers was assigned to investigate each child under Madame D's care, working to reunite them with relatives and extended family members. While many children were thankfully returned to their relatives, the fate of some remained unknown. The story of Hope Shelter became a cautionary tale, a reminder to the community about the importance of vigilance, transparency, and compassion. With Eliora now a part of their lives, Denzel, their son, took to his new role as a big brother with excitement and warmth. He was always eager to help feed, play, or soothe Eliora, often surprising Sonia and Ekeng with his gentle care and protectiveness of her. Sonia watched her children with a heart full of gratitude, silently thanking Angela for the gift of this child. She would often tell Eliora as she held her close, "You're a miracle, my sweet girl. You brought light back to us." Ekeng also formed a strong bond with Eliora, his heart overflowing with a fierce love that was both protective and nurturing. Each evening, he would lift her up, spinning her around as her giggles filled the air. He felt complete in a way he hadn't thought possible. Together, they created new routines and family traditions, baking cookies on Sundays afternoon, reading bedtime stories, and singing lullabies, Eliora quickly became woven into every part of their lives. As Eliora and Denzel grew up, they became inseparable. They would spend hours exploring the backyards, chasing butterflies, and making up stories about magical creations. Watching them, Sonia and Ekeng found healing in the simple joys of parenthood, grateful for every moment. The pain of losing their own child never vanished entirely, but it softened as they poured their love into Eliora and Denzel, watching them thrive in a home filled with warmth, laughter, and belonging. And as the years passed, Sonia and Ekeng remained committed to honoring Angela's memory and protecting the values that had brought them together with Eliora. For Sonia and Ekeng, the future was filled with hope. They had transformed their grief into a life of purpose, standing as a beacon of love and strength in their community. Their home remained a sanctuary of warmth, laughter, and unity, a place where the spirit of family thrived and where the love that had brought them all together would continue to shine for generations to come. The story teaches us the strength of love, resilience, and compassion in overcoming loss and creating a family. It emphasizes the need for vigilance and accountability within institutions entrusted with vulnerable lives, reminding us that trust must be earned and maintained. Sonia and Ekeng's journey from personal tragedy to justice for those exploited highlights how individuals can stand up against corruption, ensuring a safer, more compassionate community for everyone. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.